So I think that the two most talked about movies in the history of YouTube are The Dark Knight and The Last Jedi. There have been more videos made on these movies than any other movie I could even think of, including The Godfather, Gone with the Wind, even Joker. There have been more videos made by so many different creators about these two movies because they're very important movies for the culture of the modern era, especially The Last Jedi. And I've done enough videos on Last Jedi, but I wanted to do one here. It's been a while since I've talked about The Last Jedi. It's kind of a topic that's been kind of, in my opinion, played out, especially since Rise of Skywalker came out and that became the focus for the past like 5 months. But something was kind of discussed. So I had a conversation with a friend of mine the other day about The Last Jedi, and the friend is not a Last Jedi supporter. He does not like the film, and I also had major problems with The Last Jedi. But one thing that he pointed out that I thought was true, but I want to explain it, was that the difference between Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams when it comes to the way they made their movies is that Rian Johnson wanted to try something new, for better or for worse. Even though it wasn't that new, it was still something unique to Star Wars, and JJ wanted to play it safe, or at least that's what we've been told. JJ is, Abrams has always been kind of a parrot. He copies other people, especially with the Rise of Skywalker. He kind of played it safe there and tried to do a lot of fan service. But the thing about Last Jedi, right? And remember, I was one of the guys who, when this whole thing was going down, I was criticizing the film, but I was rarely, if ever, talking about like the political aspect of it. So many channels went so far into the whole woke thing that they forgot that the real problems with the film is that there are problems with the film, meaning that putting aside all of that political BS and left and right nonsense that I don't really care about, the movie itself has issues. There are technical narrative problems, technical editing problems. There are issues with the storytelling in the film. There's a very boring sequence in Canto Bight that pretty much everybody agrees is just kind of pointless, even the ones who like the film. But the main thing I remember reading all over the place from people who are not incels or white supremacists or any of that nonsense that the other side tried to paint them as was the character of Luke Skywalker. That was the main problem that I had and other people had with this film, and that is the character of Luke Skywalker and the choices that Rian Johnson made for that character. And even Mark Hamill himself said that he does not agree with the choices that Rian Johnson made for Luke Skywalker, that this is not Luke. And even though Rian Johnson might be the writer-director of the film, Luke Skywalker is Mark Hamill. That's been his character for over 40 years. He knows the character better than Rian Johnson. I'm sorry, but he does. He's had more in-depth conversations with George Lucas about the character. He was there with George Lucas. He developed the character. He knows. He helped develop that character. He is Luke Skywalker. And I feel like what Rian Johnson did was a big miscalculation. And even guys like Sam Witwer have talked about this, which was crazy in that interview he did recently. I think it was on Star Wars Theory's Rule of Two podcast with Mark Fernandez from Collider. They discussed that and how he doesn't I think that was where he said it, where he doesn't think that Rian Johnson understood Star Wars. And I think what it was is more so that I don't think Rian Johnson understood the power of Luke Skywalker's character. I think what Mark Hamill said speaks volumes to me now, more so than it did just a couple years ago, about the writing of Luke Skywalker and how Mark Hamill said that, well, it's not Luke, it's Jake Skywalker. It's not Luke Skywalker. What he means by that is that the character that Rian Johnson wrote is not Luke Skywalker that George Lucas wrote. The George Lucas Luke Skywalker was this very naive farm boy that got caught up in this big war because of his lineage and his potential for power, and wound up becoming a hero and an optimist and doing what people thought was unthinkable, and that is saving his father from the dark side, right? He is the ultimate redeemer, the ultimate optimist. That is Luke Skywalker, and that should, in theory, have never changed, even if his own nephew had the dark side brewing up in him. And that's the problem with the movie, is that Luke was written in a way that fans of Luke felt robbed. They felt like this was a betrayal of the character of Luke. The film's very nihilistic. There's a lot of just passive aggressiveness against the past, which, again, these things can work in the meta-narrative for some films, but not with Star Wars. Star Wars itself, and this is going to sound weird, but try to hear me out. Star Wars itself is too big to risk changing established characters this way, right? There's just certain aspects of characters you can't change. Or at least if you do change them, the execution has to be better. If you want to say that Luke Skywalker was disgruntled at what the Jedi did and their hubris and all that, that's fine. If you want to say that even Luke Skywalker was afraid to a degree, had a little bit of fear, that's okay too. He's human. But that's not what they did with Luke. They kind of made him this guy who not only tried to kill his own nephew. Yeah, it was a moment of hesitation and all that. He did admit that and explain that in the film. But the fact that he ran away with his sister and the galaxy in jeopardy, that to me is the ultimate betrayal of who Luke is and was, especially knowing that he is the most powerful Jedi at the time. So that was the biggest problem with the movie. Now, to me, if you took that same story, I want you to think about this and leave your comments in the comment section because I really want to delve into this in deeply, okay? I really want to talk about this. If you think about the idea, let's take Luke Skywalker out of the equation. Let's take the arc of Luke Skywalker in Last Jedi from being a Jedi who was disappointed in his mistakes, disappointed in what happened with what he thought the Jedi were, disappointed in things that he had, choices he made, right? And leaving the galaxy and then eventually becoming a hero, even if it was a distraction at the end of the film to help the rebels escape. Think about taking that concept and giving it to a different character. And if you do that, if Star Wars The Last Jedi, if you take that character arc, take it away from Last Jedi and give Rian Johnson his own spin-off movie and have the movie be about a Jedi who was once a great warrior, who felt like he was worthless, who had to be convinced to get back into the fight, and did get back into the fight using this force projection ability to do something better than actually fighting. If you take that idea, because listen, that's what the pro Last Jedi people say all the time. And they have a point to this. And here's my point. If you take that idea and give it to a different character, the movie can work. That idea of a Jedi, cutting himself off from the Force and having to be talked into coming back and becoming that hero once again and becoming that legend, that in itself is a great story concept. That in itself can actually work. That story arc is one that's relatable and one that I think resonates with people, but I think Luke Skywalker was the wrong character to do it with. I think if Rian Johnson took that idea and was given a spin-off Star Wars film about another Jedi, one that we wouldn't even hear about, we just heard stories about, let's say, not Luke Skywalker, a new character, and he's off on some planet, and he got away from some war. It could even be like even in the Old Republic era or something in a different time period, maybe the future, who knows. And this idea that he discovered all these things about the Jedi, and he was disappointed in them and then in himself for allowing himself to lose control, that to me, because even Rey kind of sort of had that issue. That is a good story. Think about that. That actually is a good sort of redemption arc for a character. He falls from grace and then he builds himself back up. The problem is it just doesn't work for Luke Skywalker. It's uncharacteristic of Luke Skywalker to do this. It's just not him. Obviously, as human beings, we all question ourselves. We all have moments where we make mistakes, even though we might be on the path to self-actualization, to becoming great people. We sometimes screw up, right? That's a fact. And I feel like the story itself that Rian Johnson wanted to tell, I think would have been much more effective had it been for another character. I think fucking around with Luke Skywalker, I think was a mistake. I think he underestimated how much Luke Skywalker meant to the Star Wars fans. I think that's ultimately what I think may have hurt Episode 8, because I think if Episode 8 featured Luke Skywalker in action, fans would have been a lot more forgiving. If Luke had actually done something that was people had built up in their minds of who Luke was, and if Rian Johnson recognized that and gave it to us in a creative way, it could have been a great film. I'm not saying to redo Dark Empire and redo the Thrawn trilogy. That's not what I'm saying, but the story of Luke being this incredible Jedi who passes on what he's known, like Yoda told him to Rey, would have been a great story. I mean, I will argue that till the end of the day, forever. But what they did with Luke, I felt, was just making him into this kind of coward does not work for Luke. It could have worked for a number of different characters, even during the Clone Wars era, who, ran away and kind of became cowardly, but it just does not work for Luke Skywalker. And I think that if I were to ever talk to Rian Johnson, again, because I interviewed him twice on this channel, I couldn't say it with a straight face. If I were to ever talk to Rian Johnson, I would bring it up to him and I'd say, look, man, we know you can write a story because, listen, you can be a Rian Johnson hater all you want to. Yeah, he can be a prick on Twitter sometimes, but Knives Out's a great movie with a great story. We know that Rian Johnson can write a story, but I think that he totally misfired with this. I think that looking back on it now, he misfired with Luke Skywalker. It should have been a different character, or they should have given him a spin-off movie or, something like that, and he would have had a great time with it. But Last Jedi, to me, I think that was the issue. And again, we're talking about purely the filmmaking and narrative part of Last Jedi. I don't want to talk about, the political stuff. That's a different topic. It's been talked about to death, and that's not my point. My point is about Luke's character. I think people have to remember that Luke Skywalker is an iconic character in pop culture. And there are ways of writing this. They could have written this so many different ways that made it work. But I think the choice of having Luke become a coward and run away, I think is not very effective. Having him, at least if he's going to run away, have it be for a much shorter period of time and have it make a little bit more sense than what Luke did. Have it be more characteristic of Luke and eventually come back even without Rey's help. Rey could have been like the catalyst to push him, but it didn't have to be the way they executed it. And it was like Mark Hamill said, it's not Luke Skywalker. And he was right. He was right all along. So what do you think? Let me know in the comments. Do you think that this character arc could have worked for another character and been an enjoyable film, or at least an enjoyable arc? Obviously, there's more to the movie than that, but I think it could have worked out for a different character, just not Luke. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk soon.